Will consider a bill that would change Louisiana citizens' your access to public records.
The state Senate bill would create a sweeping change to deny virtually any government documents from being handed over to the public. Josh Robertson joins us now to explain.
Well, John, under current Louisiana state law and really all across the country, thanks to the First Amendment and thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, journalists across the country can routinely submit requests for public records if they want to investigate any government efficiency issues or any possible wrongdoing. And any citizen who has any interest in how their government operates can also make and submit requests to receive those public records. Now, however, this state Senate bill, if it were to pass, would change that in Louisiana. The bill is authored by State Senator Heather Cloud and supported by Governor Jeff Landry. And if passed, it would make it so that the government can deny public access to any records that, quote, reflect advisory opinions, recommendations, and deliberations that are part of a process by which governmental decisions and policies are made. Simply put, it would apply to nearly every public record at all levels of government. Now, according to our partners, the Louisiana Illuminator, Cloud says that her proposal aims to ease public unrest, fearing that citizens may react poorly if exposed to certain opinions or deliberations for decisions that have not yet been made. Some critics and First Amendment experts believe this would create a shroud of secrecy around the government and a lack of transparency.
Limiting the public records like this lets the government operate in secret, and it erodes that public trust. This bill creates a huge carve-out to our state public records law.
Not just in the media, but anybody that cares about transparency and the First Amendment is going to be opposed to these laws. This law, if passed, would almost certainly automatically be challenged on First Amendment grounds.
Now, Governor Jeff Landry says that he does support changing the law. He supports Cloud's bill, saying that the public records law is designed to bring transparency to how the government spends tax dollars. But, quote, over time, these laws have become weaponized to stifle deliberative speech. Heather Cloud's Senate bill will go up for debate today, later this morning at the state capitol in the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee. That's expected to start around 9:30. But for now, reporting live here in New Orleans, Josh Robertson, Fox 8 Local First.